We are live.
This is Literary Roadhouse, one short story once a week. I'm Gerald.
I'm Rami.
And I'm Anise.
And this week we have been reading The Autumn of the Patriarch by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Through this short story, which I think is an extract from a novel, although the New Yorker from which it is taken doesn't mention this, we see the faded grandeur of a fallen dictator in an unnamed Caribbean country through the eyes of the people who have gained entry to the palace. They find his dead body, although it's not clear whether it is the dictator, because no one's actually seen him, or his body double. And Marquez explores the strange life of the dictator, living with his double, and the strange games they play, until they agree that the double must die as a result of a wager over a game of dominoes. It's written in the style of a prose poem, with long, languid sentences and paragraphs, which some readers will love, and some may not.
Okay, good summary.
Thank you.
So, what did you guys think of the story top level? Rami?
I would say, for me, I still haven't decided on a score. I think it's going to be determined, or not determined, but influenced at least by our discussion. But I'll tell you that it's below a 3. So I would put it at below average for me.
Okay, Gerald?
Yeah, I think similarly. I enjoyed reading it, but it just sort of didn't get anywhere for me. It wasn't a very fulfilling short story. Yeah.
Oh, see, I wish you had a bit of a counterbalance. I don't know if I go below a 3, but close to a 3. Just so for me, those long, languid sentences, they had a certain cadence that after a while really started to grate on me. It started to become a chore to get through it. And I'm wondering if the cadence would have been better in Spanish. But as it was here, like it started okay. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And then by the end of it, I'm just like, la, 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 and it's a list, and it's a list, and it's a list. And that I think was a struggle for me.
Yeah, it is kind of strange, and it's an interesting idea, and I liked the interplay between the patriarch and his body double, and the sort of problems that you run into when you have a body double, but it just fell a bit flat, I think.
Yeah, so I was thinking about that. So I want to start with the things that I sort of liked about it. One of the things that I liked about it is there's a timelessness to it when he, in like the second really long paragraph, when he's describing the characteristics of the patriarch, it of course reminded me of our own aspiring tyrants with an S these days. So, you know, and of course this is from the 70s, I believe. And you could probably place this in like the 1800s. And I guess what I'm saying is, it feels timeless in that sense. This is a type of dictator, despot, ruler, totalitarian thing that's very recognizable, and unfortunately into the future it'll continue feeling very real, right? It felt like it could be about any aspiring dictator these days. So that was nice. But I think part of the problem for me is, while that was well done, because it was like this timeless portrait and not very specific, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but the actual dictator is never named, right?
No.
He's never named. His general is, the body double is, they all have names. He's not. You're never following his story in the sense that he's not actually striving for anything. It's just a picture of a dictator from the outside. So there's no plot to follow. And I think that might be what made it a little difficult for me.
Yeah, I think so. I think yeah, it's the sort of story where I didn't get irritated by the rhythm of it. I quite enjoyed that. I quite enjoyed the reading of it. But when you come down to it, it isn't really much of a story. It's not a fable. It's not anything. It's just a sort of picture, and I just think, yeah, and so what? Just
Gerald, I made a note of this to ask you when we were getting ready to discuss the story a while back. you had said that you were swooning, and I was wondering, is swooning a good thing or a bad thing?
It can be both.
But was it in reaction to the story specifically, or just in
I think,
general?
I can't remember. I think so. I think it would have been over the language. If it was about this story, then it would have been the language and my enjoyment of it. It just sort of
Oh, okay.
falling in love with the writing rather than the story.
Though, we were just saying the thing about it being a portrait. So I think the cadence comes down to taste. It was interesting for me in the beginning, and then it just kind of wore on. But which I think we're going to discover when we record Lincoln in the Bardo. That's going to come down to tastes and what he does with language. So, but here, so we keep talking about how it's a portrait, not really a story. And we've encountered that before on this podcast. And I want to dig into that a little bit deeper. So like, okay, let's think of it as a portrait. When you're looking at an actual painting in real life, what are the things that draw you into it? There's all these little details that add up to the greater picture and to the effect. So while it wasn't really a story, and I feel like that didn't give me something to chase, there were moments where I was thoroughly amused because he was striking on some truths. And when you think about paintings, is when they capture something that feels real or realistic, and you're like, oh, that's beautiful. How did you draw that? How did you capture that? There were a lot of moments like that in this story. For example, the way that the dictator would like assault his concubines. There was never any love in his life. Or the commune of dictators living on the cliff by the sea, how they're lamenting all their losses when really they should probably be dead or in jail for life, and there's like no sense of justice. So there was all these moments that I really enjoyed. I don't know if there was any of those for you guys.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting because you can't judge the life of these people. You can't. It's a picture of this despot's life, and as such, I think Marquez does a really good job of describing how empty his life is, because there's lots of things going on, but actually none of it is of any consequence, and then it seems that the body double has more of a life than he does. And has more enjoyment out of life. So that I quite enjoyed that. That was quite interesting.
Yeah, one of my comments.
It's lonely at the top.
Oh, sorry. One of my comments was that the body double, it's luckiest man ? Because he gets to enjoy living like a king, but without the paranoia of actually being the king.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But there's so many drawbacks, as was elaborated in the story, with him not actually being able to live his own life. He's essentially living the life of someone else, and that's very empty in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and there was that moment where he had a different goal, where there was the beauty queen who he wanted, and then the dictator is like, well, we can just tie her down and you can just have her, and he's like, no, but I want her to actually love me. Like, he wants something else.
And in a strange way, that's sort of quite funny, you know. It's quite amusing that the dictator just says, "Yeah, well, we can do that." It's just so extreme and so. I don't know how realistic any of this is, but it wouldn't surprise me if certain bits of it were pretty realistic, and how. Pretty much how these people live their lives.
Mm-hmm.
It reminded me of one person in particular, and that was Saddam Hussein. Because I had read a bit about his rule and how he did actually use body doubles, and he would even have them physically augmented through surgery or what have you to more resemble him.
That's what I'm talking about with the sort of timeless and even kind of culturalist, right? Because Saddam Hussein, that's like on the other side of the world from Latin America, where you would think that this is inspired by Latin American dictators, of which there are plenty. Given the timing in the 70s as well, and the author, and even nowadays, like that's the thing that struck me, was just like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah. Who knows?
Mm-hmm. The other thing, going to the thing about time, is I had a hard time following time within the story, in that it's still not clear if he actually died the Sunday before they found him on Monday, if he had been dead for a long time. That opening paragraph goes on about how everyone thought he was there because things still worked, which I thought was very clever. The mail still worked. You know, different aspects of society and institutions still work, so he must still be there. But you as the reader are like, those things would work even without him. And there's just, it just sort of highlights the futility of him, that you never actually know how long has he been dead. It could even be like generations. Does it matter? Like there's a sense of like everyone's under a bad spell, and I'm wondering if that lack of time was intentional or if I just couldn't follow it.
No, I think you're right, and I think it's quite interesting that when you're in a situation like this where you know, I'm thinking of Cuba and Russia also, that somebody hasn't been seen for a while. Is he still alive? Is he dead? No one seems to know, and you know, they put out old videos and say, here he is, and things like that. So it's sort of, it is still it's still current, but there's I mean, I suppose the question is, what made the people go into the palace in the first place? You know, did they know that he was dead? Did they suspect he was dead? I don't understand why they had
It
to
was
break
the
in.
vultures.
Ah, of course it was.
Yeah. There's that line in the first, which I did not catch the first time. The second read through is key. I didn't even finish the second read through, but it was very illuminating, because there's that line in the first paragraph about how they would never have dared to have gone in, even though many of them had talked about storming the palace. Many of them actually would, until they saw the vulture. And they're like, what was the line? Or something about like any authority. If there was any authority in there, that would not be allowed. That was what tipped them off. Like,
I didn't catch that either.
well, so when I reread the first paragraph on the second read through, that really illuminated so many things. So I don't know if other readers or listeners had this experience. When I read the first paragraph, I was extremely disoriented. There's all these things in there: army of 7-month-old runts, the sea that had gone away. I'm like, what? Like, there's just all this kind of crazy, nonsensical references to things that you learn about later in the story. That then when I went and reread it, I was like, I can actually make sense of this now.
Yeah, and the fact it's written the way it's written, it's designed to just assault you with these images and these pictures and these ideas, and you have to sort of work your way through it and say, okay, I accept those images and I understand what they are, because they do come back later on and make more sense second time round.
I'm just pausing in case Rami has anything.
Oh, thanks. Well, I did want to talk about the language, but I don't know if you wanted to get into that now or later.
Go ahead. I don't really have an order.
Okay. Well, you already mentioned this, but I was annoyed with the long, and I call them run-on sentences, but primarily from a grammatical standpoint, just because, yeah, it is difficult to follow too, but so I picked out one sentence, it was almost 150 words by itself, and it felt like a translation. Ideally, I think a translator's job would be, and all right, this isn't to knock the translator who did it. What's his name?
Gregory Rabassa. He always does this stuff, or a lot of his stuff.
He's done a great job. But I mean, yeah, maybe it's like a stylistic thing where it's more acceptable in Spanish. But for me, and even some of the words, either I was unfamiliar with or I just felt were kind of oddly based. Or maybe it was something in the story that I missed. Like, for example, there was one I picked out where no mortal had ever seen him since the days of the Black Vomit. I have no idea what that means. And that I didn't understand. But yeah, so it felt like a translation, which I think takes away from the story a little bit.
That's funny because so that example, no mortals had seen him since the days of the black vomit. See, I actually thought that was quite clever because he doesn't have to go into the black vomit because we have phrases like the Black Death or the plague, or we have throughout history talked about large diseases that were historical by describing something in a term that you would immediately recognize as being a historical plague. You're like, he's been around forever. Like all he's telling you is like, it's just kind of like reinforcing, because there's a long list that's part of a long list of ways in which he reinforces that it feels like this patriarch has been talked about for generations and generations and generations, and he does it in just a few words without using all the words that I just used.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I didn't make the connection that it could be referencing some kind of plague or historical event. I mean, wouldn't reference something as a vomit. It's like kind of used for a singular action instead of like a cataclysmic like societal event.
Yeah. I don't know. I think I'm more accepting of things like that. It sort of amused me that turn of phrase, and it it doesn't matter. You don't have to place it in history or understand it. It's just there was a bad thing that happened at this time, and people were sick or died, and I don't know, just sort of makes it doesn't make sense, but it's easy to accept that sort of phrase in the context of the rest of the story, which is sort of comic. It's sort of I don't know how you classify this as a short story. It's quite strange.
It's funny. It feels like really long world building, right? Because even that phrase, no mortal had seen him since the days of black vomit, like that's a lot of world building right there. You have a dictator who's been around forever. At some point in this fictional history, there was some fictional plague type thing in which people puked out black substance. Like it's just a few words, and he would do it in these sentences, which I thought was really effective. But since the whole thing kind of reads like an exposition, it's like a really long I don't know if you ever, the opening chapter of East of Eden always stayed with me because he's just describing the valley in California, and there's like 5 pages of wildflowers. Sections of this felt like that. Like it's just these long lists that just give you a full picture of this world that I agree with Gerald feels a little, it's not necessarily funny. It's like a fantasy world. It doesn't feel real. There's something kind of dreamlike about it, not in a happy way necessarily, and like a very kind of severe, I don't know what I'm struggling to find the words, but it feels like fairy tale without the happy ending.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in addition to the long run-on sentences, I felt that the language was too flowery and too poetic. I found myself while I was reading it, I tried to get through the descriptions of things as fast as I possibly could.
Oh.
As a hypothetical example, he might say, he rode back to the palace, past the peacocks with their colorful feathers, beneath the tall trees, over the gravelly rocks, and it just goes on and on and on. And it's like, okay, come on, let's just get to it.
Yeah. It's funny that works for me as well, because it was this like, it's almost like you have like this billowing robe of just stuff. Like it's like he's like painting this for you. Like it's just like, and there's this, and it's just, so it's not just like it's a really rich palace. He's like giving you all these details where it just keeps vomiting out all of these like little details to really drive home how much is there, how much has been there for how long, the style of it, the bent of it, all of the coaches and carriages throughout the ages, painted the colors of the flag, things like that. It felt like a painting. I think painting's the right way to put it. There's all these details, but that's really the enjoyment for me, is looking at the painting's details.
I think that's right. I think you've hit on something there. I think if you view it as a painting, so if you're looking at a big, complicated, detailed painting, your eye would move. You'd sort of stand back and look at it, but your eye would go to all these details. You think, oh, look at that, and oh, look at that, and I think that's what he's doing with the story. He's giving you all these little details and it all goes to build up into this big picture of this sort of faded grandeur and this very strange, almost fantasy world of this dictator. Yeah, it was good. Why are my ratings going up here? Actually,
mine's going up too. I'm talking myself into a higher rating.
Hey,
yay!
Ramis is going down.
Yeah, I was relating between two scores, but I think I'm gonna go with the higher one. It's not much higher, but half a point. And I'll tell you another main issue. I think a break from the story, it reminded me of something that I need to do more of when considering my ratings, is that usually I would ask, okay, would I recommend it to someone? But I think I'm going to make a more concerted effort to also ask myself, would I read this again? And for me, even though we had an opportunity to read it again, I just did not want to. I think, admittedly, there's an element of laziness in it, but I also think that it was due to the story itself, that I just didn't want to go through the whole thing again. And it kind of seemed to me like this long, laborious task. So I spent a few minutes trying to think of a word, an expression or a name for this. So I'm gonna call it the longevity test. Yeah.
Yeah, very good.
Okay.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was, as short stories go, it was a very long short story, over 13,000 words. So there is that hesitation. But I would read this again. I would definitely read this again. Just to enjoy the flow of the language and the way it's constructed. I really enjoyed that.
Mm-hmm. I think I'd recommend it to people who already really like reading, right? Like I know that sounds like, you know how like there's some readers who are like, they read a couple books a year, they're not reading all the time, they don't have that much patience, they drop books that don't engage them immediately. That's a different kind of reader. That's like the kind of reader who just, they're there for like the pure entertainment, and this isn't going to deliver that, I think, because of the lack of plot. There's no change. I don't want to say there's no change, but just like there's no the hero doing anything. No. There's it's you know, Rami was saying there was a lot of descriptions. Like the whole thing is like an adjective, not a verb, right? So
oh, that's a great summary. Sums it completely up. Yeah, it's very good. It does.
So if you like reading adjectives, you know.
And even when it talks about even when it talks, you know, sort of almost dances around the plot, it's in the past tense. You know, this happened before, and this is how they used to behave, and these are the sort of things they did, and again, it's sort of filling in the backstory. So it's almost as if you've got this big painting with all these delightful little sparkly things on it, and then there's the thing at the side and said, you know, this was painted at so and so, and this was their influences. So you've got all this sort of backstory, and you think, and that helps to inform and helps to sort of fill in the blanks, and you understand all the pretty little pictures a little bit more.
You know, I was just thinking, we were talking about how the lists just keep having this painting unfurl with more and more details. It's a little bit like that the famous The Garden of Earthly Delights, the Hieronymus Bosch painting, the triptych, I forget, the 3 panels, triptych.
Yeah.
That the thing that makes it fun to look at the Garden of Earthly Delights is all the little things you find in it. That's kind of how this story feels for me. The thing that makes it fun is all the things that I find, but I feel like that's not enough for a lot of readers. So I also understand what Rami is saying.
And I also think that the long sentences are an enjoyment as well. And I can see some people, to some people, it would be an annoyance because it's not necessary. You know, sentences are this sort of length, and that's more acceptable. And this is just it's sort of I suppose it's a bit like Marquez himself. It's a little bit out there, and yeah, he just writes these big long sentences, loads and loads of words, and it's almost like listening to music. You know, we're doing the whole full gamut of the media here, aren't we?
All the arts. It's all the arts.
But it's like this big long phrase in music, and it's, you know, it's dancing up and down, and you sort of enjoy that in the rhythm of it. And anyway, I'll shut up there. I don't know what I'm saying.
No, but I understand what you're saying, because I picked up on the cadence as well. It's just after a while, there was some parts where it wasn't as bad when he was talking about the when all the generals except the one general sort of turned on him when they thought he was dead. I felt like the cadence changed there a little bit. It was less like a list. But even then, like, that could be the action section. But because of the way it's written, because it's so far removed, because it's like Gandalf telling you about like some like thing that happened before mortal men were even created. Like, it has that sort of feeling. It just doesn't seem like there's anything to root for or relevant, right? It's just like, oh, and over here is a group of unloyal officials. Okay. But it's still good if you enjoy that. I feel like I'm gonna start repeating myself.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I
mean, we've been discussing for a half hour, so.
Yeah, and for three of us, it's not bad.
Speaking of the sentences, I did really like the last the sentence, or I should say clause, because I guess I think the entire last paragraph is just one long sentence, but where he says, and we knew that no evidence of his death was final because there was always another truth behind the truth. And that, I think, relevant and resonated with me regarding our situation today.
Yeah, I think so, because I highlighted that bit as well, and it sort of hints at things happening that you're not aware of. So yeah, that was a good bit. I like that.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. The timelessness, right? Like, oh, that feels familiar, disturbingly.
Truth behind the truth, yeah. Eternal truth. Anyway.
So, anything else to add?
Nah, I don't think so. No, my rating's gone up.
Yeah, mine too. But I still don't know.
I did also like. I mean, you mentioned this, but Marquez's description of the dictators, that at first they're these righteous revolutionaries, but then they, you know, eventually they become dictators themselves. And when he's talking about the people seeking asylum or refuge, the world leaders, he says eventually the usurpers of the usurpers would come calling, and so on. So it's just this never-ending cycle.
Yeah, my rating's gone up. Okay, so let's go to ratings. Gerald?
4.5.
Me too, 4.5.
Ooh.
Well, 2.5 for me.
Did you say 2.85?
No, 2.5.
Oh.
5 did I come out?
I heard 2.85. I was like, Rami, come on.
What?
This is a very oddly specific rating.
Yeah. He put it in like an Excel spreadsheet. It ran like an algorithm. Okay.
Wow.
Okay, so we've rated that puppy. So we have a game, of course, but before we do that, what do we want to read?
I hope it's about dictators.
Time. Don't jump the gun. Just Rami? What do you want to read next time?
Same story I've been trying to read every week, Pinky. The Monkey's Paw by W. Jacobs.
Oh my God. Okay. I'm submitting Good People by David Foster Wallace.
Okay. And we have a game. When I found it, hang on. This is so badly prepared today.
It's about dictators.
Why are you excited?
I know, it's very strange. It's about dictators, strangely enough.
Yes.
We're reading The Monkey's Paw.
Robbie's very, very confident here. I hope it's not misplaced confidence. So,
yeah, that happens.
So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out the name of a famous dictator, and I would like you to tell me the country where they dictated.
Oh God, this is going to be embarrassing.
So, hang on, where's everyone go? So, Anais, oh crikey, they're in threes. That's difficult. Right, Anais, I'll start with you. Adolf Hitler.
Germany.
Hey.
Okay, starting easy.
Rami.
Thoroughbone. Yeah.
Fidel Castro.
Cuba.
Okay, Anais. Manuel Noriega.
Panama.
Very good.
Yeah.
Rami. Leonid Brezhnev.
Russia?
Russia, Soviet Union, indeed. I'll take Russia.
Soviet Union, sorry, yeah. Thank you.
That's okay. Anais. Francois Papadoc Duvalier.
France. I don't know.
No.
Way
Rami,
back.
do you want to take this
That
as a
would have
bonus?
been my guess. Duvalier. Spain. I don't know.
No, Papadoc Duvalier. Haiti.
Ah, see, I didn't even. I was like, it's gonna be a French colony. I don't know.
Rami Augusto Pinochet.
Oh, geez. Oh boy. Chile.
Chile. Correctamundo. Not too many more. Right, we're heading back to Europe now. Anais, Benito Mussolini. Oh, that's no
Italy.
clues in the pronunciation. Sorry. Benito Mussolini. No, it's France. Yes, it's Italy. Francisco Franco, Rami.
Franco. Was that Guatemala?
No. Anais?
Spain.
Jeez, Louise.
Oh, Rami, in trouble.
It's okay. I was hoping it would be more historical. I mean, like old history.
Oh, old.
Okay.
Oh, right. Next time, if you tell me what you would like the quiz
Yeah.
to do.
I just give him the question.
Yeah.
Like ancient. That's what I meant. Yeah. Anyway.
Okay. 3 more rounds. Anais, Nicolae Ceausescu.
Ceausescu. Ooh. I don't know. It's like some Eastern European thing. I don't know.
Could be. Rami?
Oh, yeah. It's a good guess. No, let her guess. Take a guess.
No, I don't even have a guess. Go, Rami.
Okay. Eastern European idea.
Maybe. Don't let me lead you down the wrong path here.
No, it's okay. We're going with it. Let's go with Ceausescu. Greece.
Nope.
That's not Eastern Europe.
Was it Poland?
No. No, it's Romania.
Romania.
Aye.
Rami, Robert Mugabe.
Ooh. That's not South Africa?
Not quite. I'll give you a second guess because you're close. I probably should.
Oh. No, you should. Mugabe. I was gonna say Uganda, but I don't know. It's not.
No. It's Anise.
Anise.
Got a-
Mm,
Somewhere there.
Mm.
I don't know.
Zimbabwe.
Zimbabwe.
Aye.
Okay.
Would not have guessed Zimbabwe.
Okay, Anise, your question. 2 more rounds to go. This is painful, but never mind. Idi Amin.
Uganda.
Oh, very good. Rami. Muammar al-Gaddafi.
Oh. No, I know that. Libya.
Indeed, you do. Final round. Anise, Mobutu Sese Seko.
Philippines?
No. Rami.
Somewhere in Africa, but there are a whole lot of countries there.
It's a hard one.
Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast.
No. Nice pronunciation, but no, it was Zaire. And your final question, Rami, and you've got a chance to draw level and go into the tiebreak here. Rafael Trujillo sorry.
It's Dominican Republic. Trujillo.
It's Rami's
I know the Latin ones.
Rafael Trujillo.
I'll give it to Anais.
Oh.
That doesn't. I wouldn't have got that.
My scorekeeping was 5-3, but
Yeah.
I was keeping score.
Yeah. Oh. We'll do the tiebreak just for a laugh.
Okay.
Okay.
When precisely did Adolf Hitler commit suicide?
Like the exact day of the year?
Day of the year and time of day. When do you think?
Time of day?
Yeah. Anise, what do you reckon?
I have no idea. I can't even give you no.
No, okay. No, it was it doesn't matter. 3:30.
April 3rd at noon.
Ooh.
I said it's every yeah.
30th of April, 1945, 15:30, 3:30 in the afternoon. Apparently. So, Anais, sorry, Rami, we still didn't get your story. Anais has won, and we're going to be reading
Good People by David Foster Wallace. But before you go, share your thoughts on this story by visiting us at our podcast palace at literaryroadhouse.com. And please help us appease the podcast dictators at iTunes, Stitcher, and Spreaker by offering up your comments, and help get the literary podcast revolution started by following us on Twitter at LitRoadhouse. And while we may not have a body double, we do have another show, the Literary Roadhouse Book Club, a monthly show that discusses full fiction novels. Lastly, the Patriarch could plunder our podcast equipment at any moment. Please help contribute to our podcast at patreon.com/literaryroadhouse. Every bit helps. And as always, share this podcast with the vultures and the 7th-month-old runts and the commune of despots living on a cliff by the sea. Until next time, read a good story.